Good evening, everybody. It is really good to be with you. I always appreciate every chance that I get to share God's Word with you. As some of you know, most of you know, I have the chance once every quarter to be able to present a lesson about evangelism. And I want us to think about how we in Somerset, Kentucky, right now, 2024, can be more evangelistic and how we could do, I have this graphic that I use every time from Matthew chapter 28. Go into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature. And how do we do that? How do we take the message of the gospel and share that with the people in our lives? How do we get there and every day, how do we do this? And what do we physically do when we're talking about this? Now, I really appreciate the reading from Luke chapter 10. We are going to be focused on the Good Samaritan because I think there's a lot that we can learn about evangelism from the Good Samaritan. So we're going to get to that here in a second. But I want to start with a question. And when I ask this question, you're well trained, so I think you'll know. But if I ask you, who is responsible for evangelism? Hopefully, every single one of you would say, well, obviously, we all are, right? Like, we're responsible. God expects every single Christian to be involved in evangelism. And we've talked quite a bit about what that looks like and how it might look different for different people. Your role in evangelism is probably going to look different than my role and someone else's role. We all have different strengths and abilities and talents, and we need to be using those. But here's the thing. I had this conversation with Meredith this past week, and I like words, and I like to make puns of words. And we talked about like what the word responsible means. And really, when you think about it, those who have the responsibility of evangelism, it's those who are response able to respond. And here's what I mean by that. If you think about this, what does it take to be evangelistic? Well, when you look at that word, response able to respond, some of you might be thinking, okay, that means I need to know how to answer questions. And that's true. There's a sense in which that is correct. But really, when you think about it, and what the story that we're going to be discussing tonight is going to be dealing with, is our ability to respond based on how well we are paying attention to those around us and how much we care about those around us as well. Sometimes some of us, we keep in, listen, I'm guilty of this. I keep myself so busy, so involved in so many things all the time that when I have an opportunity that's right in front of my face, I don't even think about it as an opportunity because I've just got all this going on and I can't. So I am not response able in that moment. I'm not able to respond to the need that's right in front of me. And I think we could all relate to that in some ways. And I think if we look at this story from Luke 10 very sincerely and we think through this, I think we can all be convicted of some things here. Now, as I always do as well, I like to remind you of the 4 most common excuses for why we don't evangelize as we should, the 4 C's, and like you could all probably recite them right now from memory: care, consciousness, courage, and craft. Now, tonight, I want to focus on, and the ones that I've been telling you over and over again, these are the most important, the care and the consciousness. That's what we're going to focus on tonight. How do we care more about other people? Should we care more? Obviously, yes. But how do we do that? And how are we conscious of that? How do we pay attention to the needs around us a little better? And I think that this story from Luke 10 is really, really helpful when we are thinking through how this works. So really, the title of the lesson for tonight, and what I want us to think about, is really this question: who is my neighbor? And I want us to reflect on that pretty deeply. Who is my neighbor? I did think about making a joke using why did the priest cross the road to pass by on the other side, but I thought it wouldn't be a good joke, so I'm not going to make that one. But we do need to focus on this question of who is my neighbor, because this is a deep question, and it was meant actually when Jesus when Jesus poses this story to the guy who asked the question. There's a lot to be said about that. So let's look at that. What lessons in evangelism can we learn from this story of the Good Samaritan? Now, you all are very familiar with the Good Samaritan, I would guess. As is, not people who aren't even religious know about the Good Samaritan. There's like laws in place across the country called the Good Samaritan laws. And you hear people all the time in the media, this Good Samaritan helps someone out. So, we understand the gist of the story. And especially those of us who have been brought up in the church or have been around this story a lot, we know this pretty well. And we've heard a lot of things about this. And so I'm not going to go through beginning to end and talk about every single aspect of what's happening here. What I want to do is I want to focus on specific things from the parable that we can learn and we can apply in our lives to evangelism. Because I think there's a lot here if you really think about it. And so let's warm up with an easy one. And I think something that you find out almost automatically. Did you know that just because you're religious doesn't always mean you're faithful? Who in this story was supposed to be religious but wasn't quite faithful to the task that they were supposed to do? I think you could see that automatically. It was the priests and the Levite. See this guy who was beaten within an inch of his life, laying on the side of the road, just naked, covered in blood, and what do they do when they come across him? Pass by on the other side. They intentionally go to the other side of the road. We know they saw him, and we also know that they went as far away from that guy as they could. They avoided contact completely. And as Jesus is telling this story, you might think that the people who are listening to it might be like, okay, the priest. And just even the way that the words are here. Look at this in verse 31. And by chance, a priest was going down on that road. It's like, okay, great. The hero of the story, this religious guy, the priest, the one who is keeping God's law, does absolutely nothing when confronted with this opportunity. Okay, well, then there's this Levite. Now, the Levite, you know about the Levites. They weren't in the priestly class, but they were tribe of Levi, so they dealt with religious things, right? They were working in the temple, and they had tasks according to God's law, and so they were part of this class as well. But this guy, too, had this opportunity, did absolutely nothing with it. Just because someone is religious doesn't mean that they are faithful. And this is a two-way street, actually. You're going to come across people who seem to be religious, but aren't as faithful in their lives as they think they are. And so you need to keep that in mind when you're having these discussions with people. But the thing that really gets me when I think about this story, how many times am I the Levite? Or how many times am I that priest? When I know the right thing to do, and I see this opportunity, but I don't do it. I don't do anything. I actually avoid it. I'm like, this is going to be so inconvenient. I've become not responsible, right? I'm not doing this thing that I know I need to do. I see this need, but I try to avoid it. Now, and we could debate all day of why that priest or why that Levite didn't stop. It had places to be. Didn't want to become defiled by touching, maybe it's a dead body. Don't want to be unclean, but with blood. They would have to stay outside the camp for 7 days. That's a long time. And that would mess up a lot. Or, maybe this is a setup and other people are going to come. Whatever it is, there's things that they could have said why they didn't do it. But what are we going to do when we are faced with that? Now, the guy who is the hero of the story, obviously we know, the Good Samaritan, look at what he did. And really the lesson that I want to learn from him, one lesson anyway, do we care like he cared? Do we care as deeply as this Samaritan man cared? And there's a couple things that go in with that. You think about how we need to overcome indifference. So the priest and the Levite, they were indifferent towards the man. Now, they didn't do anything to intentionally bring him more harm, but they definitely didn't do anything to help. The Samaritan, however, overcame indifference and did something about it. He stepped in and did something when no one else did. And this goes along with this idea. Interruptions oftentimes equal opportunity. I don't know if you've experienced this a lot, but I know in my life, most of the time, the greatest opportunities that I have, is when I feel like I'm too busy to do anything about it. And it's like, I'm so involved in this, and I've got laser focus, I need to get this done. And then there's this need that pops up, and I'm like, oh, I really don't have time to deal with this. A lot of times, the greatest opportunities come when we feel like, well, I can't do anything about it, that I'm just too busy. And those interruptions, though, if we really think about it, those are the times where we have the greatest opportunities. And a lot of times, we have those things that come up that we can do something about, that we can take action in, but it's going to cost something for us. It's going to take some of our time and some of our effort and some of our energy. I mean, just think about what the Samaritan did. Like, he was traveling on a road, and I mean, this 17-mile stretch from Jerusalem to Jericho, I don't know what he was doing, where he was going. I mean, this is a parable. Jesus made up the story, so I don't know if this was a real person. But he's got somewhere to be. And that's what we do, right? We have somewhere to be. We have places to go, people to see, and things to do. But he took the time to stop what he was doing. He spent a lot of time, and we're going to get back to that a little bit. He spent the entire night, however much was left in the evening, in the night, and the next day, taking care of this guy that he didn't even know, that he had literally just met. And literally just met on the side of the road, beaten to a bloody pulp. This guy was able to take this opportunity that was in front of him, completely interrupted his schedule, stopped what he was doing, and took care of what needed to be taken care of. I think there's a lot that we can learn in that, and we need to really consider that. Something else that stands out in this story, compassion over prejudice. And as you know, the dealings between the Jews and Samaritans, they hated each other. They did not like each other. Now, I know some of you are the type that like to write a lot of notes in your margins and all that. I'm not one of those guys. I don't do that a lot. And so I usually have like notebooks and stuff that I write in and keep track of my notes that way. But there is one note that I made in my margin in my Bible. It was actually in Acts 8. It wasn't here, but it was involving some of this. And the only thing I wrote, and I don't know who said this, don't know where it came from, but all it says is Jews and Samaritans got along about as well as pickles and peanut butter. No idea where that came from. But that sort of tells you, like, the mentality that if you like pickles and peanut butter, just stop. But the mentality of that, like, you have the Jews who absolutely despise the Samaritans because they were half-breeds. They were from when the northern tribes, like, intermingled. Well, they got taken in captivity, but they intermarried with the Assyrians, and there was a whole thing. So the Jews really didn't like the Samaritans. Now, Jesus made the Samaritan the hero of the story on purpose, I think, to prove a point. But this concept of compassion over prejudice. What would you do if it was your greatest mortal enemy that was laying in front of you bloody? What if it was you laying that there bloody, and the person who comes to rescue you is your greatest enemy? How would that make you feel? A lot of times, when it comes to evangelism, when it comes to sharing the gospel with people, we already have this idea of who's going to listen and who's not. And if there's somebody who's like outside my circle, or that's different from me, I don't want to reach out to them for whatever reason. We need to get over that. We need to stop seeing people as our enemies and start seeing people for what they are. They're made in the image of God, and we're all in the same boat together. And so I think that we can really learn that from this story as well. Something else that really, really stands out to me is how active this guy was in helping out this wounded man. So a few things here, just quick in a row. He met his needs. There was a relationship involved. I'll talk about that in a second. And it was very sacrificial. So if you think about the things that the Good Samaritan did for this guy who was beside the road, what did he do? Well, he was bleeding a lot. It says that he bandaged him up. I don't know how much of this is true. I read into this a little bit and said most people probably didn't travel around with like a first aid kit or bandages. And so what likely happened is this guy probably toward like strips of his own clothing to make bandages for the guy. Now, regardless, he's using some of his own stuff that he's obviously not going to get back because it's going to be real bloody to take care of the guy. And then it says he poured oil and wine on his wounds. That was the best medicine that he had there. He had something that could try to control the bleeding, maybe stop some of the bruising, some antiseptic cleanliness and whatever. And it wasn't like he just like sprinkled a little on sparingly. He said he poured it. Like he was using his own resources to take care of the guy. He was really sacrificing. And then he took the guy to an inn. As close by as he could muster, I imagine. And it said that he put him on his own animal. I mean, what else are you going to do, right? I don't know, like maybe a donkey, camel, whatever. Just imagine the things that you might say. It's like, I just had this thing shampooed. But no, you don't shampoo a donkey. But, I mean, he put him on his own animal, bloody and everything, to take him to this inn. And so he used his stuff to get this accomplished. Then, it wasn't like he just dropped him off at the ER and said, good luck. Yeah, the ER on the way to Jericho. But he stopped at this inn and took care of him. He stayed with him through the night. How do we know that? Because the next verse said, on the next day that he talked to the innkeeper and did all that. So he stayed with him all night, taking care of him, really, really working hard to make sure this guy was alive. And then, remember what he told the innkeeper? He was like, here are 2 denarii. You just take care of him, whatever it takes, and I'll pay you back when I come back. Imagine that. Now, I don't know exactly what the going rate for a room was at the roadside inn. I read anywhere from this 2 denarii would have been enough for between 2 weeks to 2 months of lodging. I don't know, somewhere in that ballpark. So it's quite a bit of time that he paid for. And it wasn't like he just set it and forget it, run away. He said, whatever that any expense you incur, bring it to me. Because, I mean, think about this. If he would have just, dropped this guy off, and this guy had literally nothing, and this innkeeper would have had to take care of him and all that, you know what would have ended up happening to that guy? You'd probably become a slave. And at that point, it's hard to work your way out of that. So this guy had enough compassion to see his needs now and to anticipate some of the needs that were to come. He gave of his own self to help a complete stranger who he hated. Well, maybe he didn't hate, but the guy hated him probably. And he was willing to do all of that just to take care of this guy. Now, that's crazy. I don't know, if you think that's not crazy, it's crazy. How loving, how compassionate, how sacrificial this guy was. How he was able just to do all of this thing for a complete stranger, but he did it. And he gave of himself so much. Now, here's the problem that we have sometimes when it comes to evangelism. And with helping people in general. And I hate to say this, but this is me a lot of times. I want a quick fix. I want somebody is struggling, here's $20. Here's some money. Now go fix it. What it really takes a lot of times is spending time with the person, getting to know, and I know, how much is this guy getting to know him? But just bear with me for a minute. We have these relationships when it comes to evangelism. It's more than just, I'm going to tell you what you need to do to be saved, and then I'm going to leave you alone. There is an interaction there. There is time that we spend developing a relationship with the person, that we just help that person in whatever ways. Now, this guy obviously was helping physically. We are hoping to help, much with a deeper need, with the spiritual needs. And that's going to take some time, effort, energy. You're going to get involved in people's lives. You're going to get involved in some messy situations that are going to make you feel really uncomfortable. But that's what it takes, because that's where people are. And we need to meet people where they are. Whatever sacrifice that we need to make that happen, whatever needs we have to meet, whatever relationship we need to develop, that's what we need to do. Because that's the kind of love I think Jesus is teaching us we need to have for other people. Now, I'll say one more thing about this thought. And I really don't mean for this to be controversial, and please don't take it that way. But what we're seeing here is a non-institutional kind of love. It's non-institutional evangelism. And what I really mean by that is it's a personal thing. This guy was deeply invested in the life of someone else, and he spent time on his own reaching out to this person. We are blessed here at Southside to have a really strong group. This group is amazing. And there's a lot of people who are doing a lot of great things, evangelism-wise, to reach out to the world around us. We support several preachers throughout the world who are reaching people with the gospel. And that is awesome. We need that. We need to do that. But when we think about our evangelistic efforts as a whole, do we ever think, well, our group is involved in evangelism, and I'm part of the group, so that means I'm okay. I'm doing what I need to do. I don't know. Maybe you are. I don't know. But we can't just say our group is good, so that means I don't have to work as hard. What we have to remember is a lot of times when people talk about evangelism, they call it personal evangelism. And I think that's a good word to put with it. Because personally, what am I doing to evangelize and help with that? And again, like we said before at the beginning, not everyone is going to be the teacher. Not everyone's going to be the one who is breaking it down and sending across the table from people. We all have our roles to play. But I just want us to keep that in mind. How involved are we personally with reaching the lost around us? I believe this section of Luke is so fascinating for so many reasons. And one thing that you may have noticed, you may not have, I completely skipped over the first section that Luke read for us tonight. And I did that on purpose. Because what we see here, this is really a story within a story. The whole Good Samaritan thing was a story Jesus told, because what was Jesus doing before he told the story? He was evangelizing. There was a guy coming to Jesus, he asked him a question, and Jesus had an interaction with him, and then Jesus uses this story to help evangelize the guy. This works on so many levels. And there's a lot to unpack here, how this is all put together. Now, who is Jesus evangelizing here specifically? It's that lawyer. And when you think lawyer, don't think like defense attorney or like prosecutor. Lawyer as in like expert of the Old Testament law. So someone who knew the law really, really, really well. So he's interacting with this lawyer, this person who knows the law. And the lawyer stood on verse 25. Do you notice what he said about him? And put him to the test. Doesn't seem like this lawyer is really super concerned about the actual truth. He's just trying to trap Jesus in what he says. And if you're careful, when you're reading through the Gospels, especially Luke does this a lot, he lets us know whether the person coming to Jesus is sincere or not. And so this person is obviously not sincere. He's putting Jesus to the test. And so really, this is helpful for us in some ways. Because what Jesus teaches us through this is how do we reach someone who is, one, already religious. He's like a Jewish superstar. He knew the law really well, religious elite. But specifically in this case, how do we reach someone who is also self-righteous? Who think that they already have it going on. They already know what they need to know. And how do we know that this guy is like that? Well, because of the interaction Jesus has with him. I think it's very clear and obvious what he was thinking. And so let's think about this. This story. The guy asked, "What must I do?" That's essentially what he asked there. What shall I do to inherit eternal life? Did you know that's the same question that the rich young ruler posed to Jesus? And that's the same question, really, what Nicodemus was getting at when he came to Jesus. What must I do to inherit eternal life? And so Jesus, he could have answered that in many different ways. We'll talk about that. But Jesus knew this guy's a lawyer. He knows the law, and so he turns it back on him, and he says in verse 26, what's written in the law? How does it read to you? And then the guy gives an answer. On a scale of 1 to 10, how well do you think the guy did? I mean, Jesus tended to think that his answer was right. So he gave the right answer. He did. Like, he gave the right answer. And his answer, by the way, came from two passages. Deuteronomy 6, 4 through 5. You should love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, strength. And also Leviticus 19, 18. That's where you get love your neighbor as yourself. And so he got it. He nailed it. He got the right answer. And at that point, what do you do if you're Jesus? Is that all the answer? Okay, let me ask you this. If this guy would have followed those commandments 100% accurately through his life, would he have been saved? Love the Lord your God with all your heart and love your neighbor as yourself. I would say yes, because that's what the whole law consists of. If you think about it, 10 commandments, first 4 were about loving God. The last half is about loving your neighbor. If you truly love God with all your heart and you're loving your neighbor as yourself, that's the entirety of the law. That really summarizes the law. And if you're doing that, you're going to keep all of the laws. So, in a sense, that's absolutely true. And Jesus says that. In Matthew 22, Jesus even, he said, this is the summation of the law. Summing it up, love the Lord your God with all your heart and love your neighbor as yourself. And that's it. That's what all of the commandments hang on. So that's a pretty good answer. And that's when, at this point, Jesus said, okay, yeah, do that, and you'll live. It's what the guy says next that really shows you that there's a problem. Now, do you think the guy actually did love the Lord, his God, with all of his heart and always did everything 100% right all the time? I mean, I would say probably not. Any sin we commit is ultimately against God. You think about how David responded to his sin with Bathsheba in Psalm 51. He said, it's against you, Lord, and you only have I sinned. Like, any sin we commit is against the Lord, and so there's some disconnect between our love for the Lord and what we do. But just coming back to this and what he's saying here, what Jesus responds with, it's interesting to think about what Jesus didn't say. At this point, he didn't say, well, what you need to do now is believe in me. Jesus, in other places, he said that. That's what he said to Nicodemus. You need to believe in me. And so, that's really what it comes down to. Why didn't Jesus say that outright here? Well, in a lot of ways, in order to get the good news of salvation, do you know what you have to understand first? The bad news. You have to understand that you're in a position that you need Jesus. If someone comes and they're asking these questions, what do I have to do? But they already think that they're good, what good is it going to tell them? What good is it going to do them if we tell them, here's what you need to do? They need to realize what kind of position that they are in themselves. And so, really, this is what we have to consider. Do you actually love like that? So the things that you said, love the Lord your God and love your neighbor. Okay, Mr. Lawyer Man, do you actually love like that? You say you do, but do you? If you would have asked me when I was in high school or something, if you said, Jason, do you love people in China? I said, yeah, of course. Do you love people in Australia? Yeah, of course I do. I love these hypothetical people that I've never met. Now, Jason, here are the names of 12 people that you go to high school with. Do you love each and every one of these? Okay, well, let's hold up now. We have an easier time to say that we love people that we've never met and that really we've never interacted with. The people that we actually interact with, those are the hard ones to love. Those are the hard ones to really show this kind of love to. Now, and what kind of love do we need to show? Well, love them like you love yourself. Well, what does that look like? The Good Samaritan. Do we have that kind of love for every person that we come in contact with? Now I think the lawyer was catching on to that, and that might be why he throws out that question. Okay, well, hold up. who's my neighbor? And we got to consider that. Now, even before that, I want you to think about a couple things here. Leviticus 19, the same book that we have this love your neighbor as yourself thing, there's a verse here, Leviticus 19, verse 34, that, I don't know, I guess they just forgot about. In Leviticus 19:34, the stranger who resides with you shall be to you as the native among you, and you shall love him as yourself. For you were aliens in the land of Egypt. I am the Lord your God. Do you know that they were told to love the strangers among them too? And to view the strangers as their neighbor as well? That's an important thing. And that's hard when you really consider that. How did these people justify the hatred that they had? What did they do? And one passage I'll look at with you real quick, Psalm 139. There's this psalm, and it's very descriptive, you could say. Psalm 139, I think this became sort of the motto of some of the people in that day. Psalm 139, verses 21 and 22. Do I not hate those who hate you, O Lord? And do I not loathe those who rise up against you? I hate them with the utmost hatred. They have become my enemies. Seemed like a verse that they would take to heart and be like, yes, see, I am so faithful, I hate all of your enemies. And they started looking at that as a virtue, as something that they were required to do. You notice in Matthew 5, when Jesus is going over on the Sermon on the Mount, he says, now you have heard it said, probably a lot of the rabbis who were teaching, that you need to love your neighbor, but hate your enemy. Remember what Jesus said to that? No, like you need to love your enemy and to bless those who persecute you and all of those things. And so we really need to get our mindset the right way. Now, that question, who is my neighbor? I want us to think about that. What was the guy actually saying there? When he said, well, Jesus, who is my neighbor? I think what he's really getting down to is who qualifies to be loved. So I know I'm supposed to love my neighbor as myself, but who meets those classifications? Who is the neighbor that deserves my love? Who deserves the love that I need to give to them? And I think that's what he was getting down to. If I can declassify someone as neighbor, if I don't have to view someone as neighbor anymore, then maybe I don't have to treat them with love and kindness and all of that. This guy, I don't know, regardless, he thought pretty highly of himself because in verse 29, when he asked this question, he was seeking to justify himself. I hope that we don't do this to try to justify ourselves. I hope that we're careful when we think along these lines. Now, I'm doing a couple things with this at the same time. I'm wanting us to look at this guy. How do we reach someone who has this kind of mentality? But also, how do I make sure I'm not having this kind of mentality? I'm tricking you, but I'm not doing a very good job of tricking. Because what we're trying to do is see, why do we need to care more? How do we care more? And how are we more conscious of the needs around us? We're coming back to that. So we need to care about people so deeply and just regardless of who they are and their background. But how do we reach a guy like that? What do we do? Well, we see what Jesus did. This is when Jesus tells the story of the Good Samaritan, and he brings that story in. And really, it's revealing something about this guy. It's showing that his mindset, his mentality, he is not loving as he thinks he is. And so, honestly, we might not be able to come up with a story like that on the spot. Like, I don't expect you to come up with like the modern day equivalent to the Good Samaritan. The good thing about the Bible is we have these stories recorded of Jesus teaching these. And so, when you sit down and read the Bible with someone, you can help guide them through so they can see these things on their own. That's a really powerful thing to do. And maybe if you encounter someone like this, this is a good place you could go to discuss that and to think through what their attitude is. And so this is a double-edged sword here. Sometimes when you're interacting with people, they ask the wrong questions. This guy asked the wrong question. Who is my neighbor? Now, if someone asks you the wrong question, you probably shouldn't just say, well, that's a terrible question. Let me tell you what you should have asked. No, you need to ask questions too. Get a conversation. Conversations are really helpful. And so Jesus had a conversation with this guy, showed his real struggles, and then directs him into a completely different line of thought. And then the question Jesus asks at the very, very end of the story. Remember what he said? The guy had asked him, who is my neighbor? But that's not what Jesus ended with, was it? He said, which one of these proved to be a neighbor? Which one of these was a neighbor to the man? Verse 36. And the guy, obviously, the guy knew. Now, again, the deep hatred for Samaritan, he didn't even say the word Samaritan. He was like, the one who showed mercy. Jesus was like, yes. And did you see what Jesus said to him? Go and do likewise. This is what you need to do. If that doesn't make you uncomfortable, nothing will. Because the amount of love that this guy had, it is just amazing. So really what it comes down to, what Jesus is trying to get us to see, instead of saying, who qualifies to be loved? What we need to think about and consider is, am I the neighbor who is loving unconditionally? Am I the one who sees the needs in the people around me and does something about it? Am I speaking when I need to speak? Am I taking care of the needs that I need to take care of? Am I being the neighbor? So instead of focusing on who do I need to look out for, am I being the kind of person that is caring and that looks for those needs and helps? And that's what it comes down to. And that's what Jesus is teaching here. And that's how he's reaching this one guy. And hopefully how he's reaching all of us right now. I really hope this convicts you, because it convicts me like crazy. This is some hard stuff to think about. And we need a little fire under our feet sometimes. There's a lot that we learned here. There's a lot more that we could learn as well. But it's about time for me to wrap this up. And so I want to just give you a couple pieces of encouragement. Now, some of you know that coming up this week, starting another round of community studies. And so this is an opportunity to reach out to some of the people in your circle who might not be as comfortable coming to a worship service or whatever. Maybe they'll feel comfortable just getting together with a group of people at a coffee shop and reading the Bible together. There's an opportunity coming up on Thursday evenings. We're going to be looking 1st, 2nd Timothy and Titus, not all at the same time, but about 2 chapters a week. From this Thursday all the way through October the 17th, 5:30 to 6:30. And I do ask, if you have the chance, opportunity, share that on Facebook. I'll get a link out so people know about it. And that's just something that you can do to get the word out. But also, something else that I think would be really helpful for us to consider. And this is in your bulletin. The September Challenge. If you've forgotten, every month there is an evangelism challenge. And it's something for all of us we're not keeping tally or score or anything like that. But it's just something good for us to think about and consider. In your bulletin, the challenge for this month is that we pray every day for God to work in the lives of those searching for the truth. Because we understand God is the most active participant in evangelism in the world. What we do is we act as an instrument of His righteousness and as an instrument to reach out to those around us. We need to pray that God will work in the lives of the people around us. Mention them by name. Mention the people in your life by name who you want God to be working in the lives of, so that way it helps you to be more thoughtful about those situations, more thoughtful about looking for opportunities, so that way when those opportunities present themselves, you're ready to say something, to do something about it. And it's just a good reminder for us to be thinking about that as we go along. I really appreciate your patience and your attention tonight. There's obviously a lot that we talked about, a lot more that we could have said, but I hope this was helpful in some ways. Every time we have a chance to come together and to hear a message from God's Word, we don't want to leave without giving you the opportunity to respond to the message. Because that's what we all need. Our greatest need is the Lord, and if we don't realize that, we're lost. If you need to respond to the Lord's invitation, if you need to become a Christian, put Him on in baptism, we're ready to assist you with that. If you are a Christian and you've fallen away, but you want to come back and you're ready to dedicate your life to serve Him, we're ready to help you with that too. Whatever you need to do to make yourself right with the Lord, please come as we stand and sing.